to keep going through such a horrific situation. So anyways, write down your questions and I'll answer them later. So Jay, do you just want me to tell you to go to the next slide? Is that how you want me to do this? Okay, so anger is a seed for war. Forgiveness is a seed for peace. And it took Eva almost 50 years to come up with this quote after she had been in the Holocaust. So next slide. Eva Moses Kor is 83 years old. She was born on January 31st, 1934 in Romania. Her parents were Alexander and Jaffa Moses. She had two older sisters, Edith and Alice. She was one of 117 family members put in a cattle cart and taken to Auschwitz. She was a Mengele twin. She's a Holocaust survivor. She was one of 200 individual twins that were found alive when Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviets. She lives in Terre Haute, Indiana. She is a force to be reckoned with, and she travels the world helping countless people overcome the pain of their pain of tragedy. So next slide. So Eva is a survivor of the Holocaust, a community leader, a forgiveness advocate, a champion of human rights, a public speaker, and an educator. Eva has emerged from a trauma-filled childhood as a brilliant example of the human spirit's power to overcome. Eva, if you just are with her 10 minutes, you realize that she has a never give up attitude. And she's just also a very encouraging person. So, Eva's home was in the village of Ports, which was in the district of Transylvania, Romania. Transylvania is in the upper northwest corner of the present-day Romania. In 1940, Transylvania became a part of Hungary, and Hungary agreed to support Nazi Germany. Hungary was an ally of Germany. By July 7, 1944, 437,000 of the 650,000 Jews in Hungary had been deported to Auschwitz. It is estimated that over 70% of the Jewish population of Greater Hungary was deported, murdered, or died under the reign of the Nazis, and most of them after March 1944. While it took nearly 4 years to rid Poland of its Jews, the process of eliminating the Hungarian population was accomplished in 9 months. Eva's family was among the 437,000 deported to the death camps. Again, her parents were Alexander and Jaffa Moses. She had two older sisters. Eva says that her mother was an angel from heaven. She was beautiful and a kind person. Eva says that her mother and father were very strong people who had worked hard on their farm. Even though her mother had been ill, Eva hoped for a long time after they were released from Auschwitz that they had passed the inspection and that they were still alive. This is Eva and Miriam. That is on their first birthday. Eva reports that her mother loved to dress the twins alike. Eva remembers family members telling her as they were growing up that they looked so identical that they had to put tags on them. And that her mom bought everything in pairs. She never dressed them separately in different clothes. She remembers that her sisters were very talented in music and art and would have made wonderful musicians or artists. When she and Miriam arrived home after liberation, they walked from room to room to find some sort of memory, some sort of remnants of what they had from their past. And this is the picture that she found crumpled up on the floor that apparently the Nazis, as they were digging through and trying to find their gold and their jewels and stuff, had left behind. There's apples on the trees. This is her sister Edith. This is her sister Alice. The little girl here is a family friend named Lucy. It was actually Edith and Miriam's, Eva and Miriam's best friend, and then this is a cousin who was visiting that summer. And when Eva tells her story on the bus as we were going to the different places through Krakow, different stories, and how she's the only person in her family that is still alive, the Moses family. So next slide. So this is the selection platform. So this is rough. So they spent a good chunk, basically 3 full days. They arrived the 3rd evening to Auschwitz. And when they got off of the train, and here's a cattle car, similar to probably what she arrived, it was total chaos. And they're standing on the selection platform, which is no longer here. It's all gravel now. And that was one of the things that she commented the first time when she visited back in 1984, I believe, that where's the selection platform? Why was it taken down? Why is it not still part of the whole process? And they just said it was just better not to have it. So it wasn't apparently very big. Do you remember how big it was? Maybe a quarter mile long. And in the pictures you can see it better. But she remembers her dad and 2 older sisters were in front of them, and then her mom grabbed the twins. And in a blink of an eye, her 2 older sisters and dad were gone. And then she's left, and this German soldier is saying, "Twins, twins." Looked at her and said, "Is that good?" And the soldier said yes. And the next thing she knows, she and her sister are standing on the platform. And now her mother is exiting right with these hordes of other people. And exiting right means that you're on the road to death. You're ready for the crematorium. So she and Miriam were taken with the soldier to the left path. And if you were chosen to go left, then you went to the camp. And if Eva would have known that was the last time she was going to see her whole family, she would have said goodbye and "I love you." So they were very misled in the whole process. The soldiers that were coming into Hungary were saying, you know, we're going to take you to a work camp. We're not going to kill you, because they were hearing different things. And the one thing that Eva was very profound about as she was walking and sharing her story through the camp was she remembers, even when she was 5 years old, listening to Hitler talk about him and what he was going to do for Europe. And she remembers him yelling, and she's like, man, this guy is really mean. Why would anybody support and follow somebody who is really mean? And she begged her dad year after year, as some of the family members were going to Israel, to Palestine, and different locations in Israel. She begged her dad for several years, let's follow them, let's follow Uncle, let's go with Aunt and Uncle here. And her dad was just, Alexander was just like, I trust them. They're not going to hurt us. We're farmers, you know, we're valued. So you can go to the next slide. So on our way to the crematorium, this is basically the holding spot, and this is a great big forest. And a lot of, most of the people who were being put in the crematorium were put in this forest. It's a very peaceful place. As we walked through it, we just kept going, wow, if these trees could talk, what a phenomenal story they would share. Across from the forest is a great big pond. And so it was a pretty setting. But can you imagine what the thoughts were as you're hearing people scream and holler and cry, knowing that their life is ending? You can go to the next slide, Jay. So this is crematorium, and these are the remnants of that. This is gas chamber 2, and this is gas chamber 3. Eva, from what they can understand through all the history and some of the documents, her mom and dad and siblings were not documented per se, but anybody who was undocumented went to the second crematorium, so there was never any record. And they estimate probably about 2 million people alone were destroyed in. And then after about 4 days, you can go to the next slide, Jay. Eva and Miriam met Dr. Joseph Mengele, and he was also had a nickname, Angel of Death. Dr. Mengele was born March 16, 1911. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937, was first part of the invasion in the Soviet Union, and then was recruited to be a doctor. The Nazi doctor worked at Auschwitz only, nicknamed the Angel of Death. Had the look of an angel, Eva said, but definitely didn't act like one. Escaped to Brazil, and then he died under another name, under the name of Wolfgang Gerard in 1971. In 1992, DNA confirmed that he was dead. And in the late 1980s, Eva and her sister founded a foundation, the Candles Museum. They were interested in finding the other twins that were with them at Auschwitz. And then they started chasing and trying to figure out where the Angel of Death was. They wanted to confront him. They weren't able to do that because in 1992 they discovered that he was dead. So if you want to go to the next slide. This is block 10. This is where most of the experiments were done. Block 10 is no longer open to the public. The windows are blocked. Nobody can see inside, as you can see in this Bible picture here. It's just there as a reminder. This is the evil happened here. Eva shares that she and Miriam were part of a group of children that were alive for only one reason: to be used as human guinea pigs. During our time in Auschwitz, we talked very little, starved for food and human kindness. It took every ounce of strength to stay alive. Because we were twins, we were used in a variety of experiments. 3 times a week, we'd be placed naked in a room for 6 to 8 hours to be measured and studied. It was unbelievably demeaning. In another type of experiment, they took blood from one arm and gave us injections in the other. After one injection, I became very ill and was taken to the hospital. Dr. Mengele came in the next day, looked at my chart, and declared that I only had 2 weeks to live. For 2 weeks, I was between life and death, but I refused to die. If I had died, Mengele would have given Miriam a lethal injection in order to do a double autopsy. When I didn't die, he carried on experimenting with us, and as a result, Miriam's kidneys stopped growing. They remained the size of a child's all her life. So in early 1990s, Miriam was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And Miriam, after they had returned to Romania, then the time in Israel. Miriam stayed in Israel, married in Israel, and died in Israel. But at one point, when she found out her sister needed a kidney transplant, Eva got on the airplane and went to Israel, but they think it was probably too late by then. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the next section, this next slide, when we were actually touring, Eva would be in a golf cart and she was ahead of us. And when we got to block 10, here is the Israeli army. And there's probably 100 Israeli soldiers listening to her, and she's sharing her story, and she's talking about forgiveness. And if you know anything about the Jewish religion, they're not about forgiveness. It's up to God to decide who he forgives. And so it was a really cool thing. There were several of us that were outside of the circle just praying for her, that they would listen. You could tell when she got to the forgiveness part that she had forgiven the doctors, and she had given her parents for leaving them behind and dying and not providing like a good parent should in this kind of situation. You could just hear them going, wow, yes, we have to forgive. You could hear some of that. So here she is with some selected parties, but they all walked away and they were crying and they could not believe her story of forgiveness and the cruelty that she had experienced. So you can go to the next slide. So this is the blood lab. But before I talk about that, this is Eva's actual tattoo, and she will tell you when day 2 came, they were taking her measurements and stuff, and then they wanted to tattoo her. And she was feisty at 10, and she threw a fit, and they were not able to give her actual tattoo number. It's all blurry, even in her old age. There's a picture in the museum of her in her younger years as a child, and you can't read her number. She just was determined that they were not going to tattoo her, and she fought and screamed and kicked, and she bit people, and she was determined that she was not going to be a number, that she was going to be Eva Moses. So the blood lab is where Eva and her sister Miriam spent a lot of time. Several times a week they took blood. Nobody knows how many children were actually born in Auschwitz at the time, but the blood lab is also where they murdered any babies that were born in the camp, as well as their mothers. Couldn't have that witness. And the only remaining camp registry for all of Auschwitz to Birkenau is a notation from January 10, 1945, and this is from the Soviet soldiers, that mentions a total of 247 pregnant women and midwives, and 146 living children ages 0 to 3 on that day when the Soviets liberated the camp. And that day they found 60 children when they liberated them. So there's no documentation of their death. It just mentions that people were born and mothers, midwives, but there was no record of them. Eva reports 3 or 4 times a week. We marched about 3 kilometers or so from the Birkenau to Auschwitz I, where they carried out the observations for different kind of blood tests and injections. Go to the next slide. So this is a memorial of the Mengele twins. This is kind of what the building would have looked like. And there are bunk beds, and they would just load people in. There would be 1,000 people, it's estimated, that would live in a building like this. And they were living on top of each other, and there would be 5, 6 kids in a bunk trying to, just survive and huddled together, especially during the winter when there was very little heat, very little food, very little water. So every time Eva goes, she puts, she's got some of the surviving twins who want to place memorial flowers. So these are not necessarily she and her sister. There are other people who contacted her and say, hey, I heard you're going back to Auschwitz. Would you lay flowers down for my parents? And so they, Candles Museum laminates the pictures and puts with them. And so this is kind of a memorial that we lay the flowers for. And then she talks over. As you can see where she's sitting here, that's where the actual barrack would have been, but now it's just a memorial. It's been taken down. Next. So as we're walking the 10 miles just in Birkenau alone, it's a great big square. The railroad track is in the middle of this. And over, we would tell ourselves, why didn't anybody bomb the railroad track coming in and out? Why didn't anybody have the guts to just drop a bomb and stop all this? They knew it was happening. And even Eva says to this day, nobody understands. Nobody understands why so many people were murdered and killed. So you can see the aerial view. This train track goes 1 mile from here all the way to the crematoriums. And then there's an aerial view over there. You can no longer go in this tower. That picture is from Candles Museum itself, the picture that I got from them. So next slide. This is block 22, and this is where Eva and Miriam spent basically the last 60 days of their time at Auschwitz. And it's closed off, so you can't go in, but here's Eva outside taking pictures, and this is where they were liberated from. If you go to the next slide. So this is Miriam, and this is Eva. This is a picture from the video of the Soviets as they're taking the children out of Auschwitz. And then you can see the electrical fence there, what it looks like today. And if you go to the next slide. This is one thing that Eva likes to do every time she's there. She likes to go through the electric fence because, again, that's empowering freedom, and she is reminded that she's free. She doesn't have to be a victim anymore. And so here the rest of us are following her as we're being liberated ourselves. So the one thing that she comments in her book is that she and Miriam were not chubby. They were skeletons. And, you know, she would look at her sister and go, man, she's just a walking skeleton. I wonder if I look like that too. The reason they look like they're so chubby is because when they were being liberated, they grabbed everything they could, everything that they had been collecting, and shoved it in their clothing because they didn't know what the next journey was for them. So they had like loads of bread because they went to the kitchen and grabbed everything. They had bars of soap. They had toys that they had made, and they had stuck everything in. Now, Miriam doesn't understand, or no, Eva doesn't understand why she always had a chubby face. She always says she's always had a chubby face. Even when she was a skeleton, she always had a chubby face. So that's why they look so chubby, is because their pockets in their whole uniform is filled to the gills because they didn't know what they were going to do next. So they were actually liberated on January 27th, 1945, 4 days before their 11th birthday. So after 9 months in a refugee camp, then they returned to their village, ports in Romania, only to determine that not one of their family members had survived. They had a family friend who was able to write to an aunt and uncle in Israel, and then they came and got the girls and took them to Israel with them. So if you want to go to the next slide. So the memorial service. This is the International Monument, which was erected in 1967 at Auschwitz II, which is also called Birkenau. The monument is located at the western end of the main camp, between the ruins of Crematoria 2 and 3. The crematoria buildings were the largest gas chambers at Birkenau. There were about 400 artists who entered a design contest. Auschwitz wanted to do an international memorial to put in there. So when groups of people, students, you know, visitors, when the big groups of people came, they could have a place to have a memorial. The monument this is the actual monument, is a large area with wide steps. As you can see, there's some steps here. It's quite large with jumbles of dark stones that look like gravestones or coffins to me, but the guide said that these stones were meant to resemble the victims. On the steps of the monument, there are rows of granite slabs, each with a metal plate on top, which has an inscription in different languages, including Yiddish, English, and every major language in Europe. The granite slab inscriptions with the words, with these words: "Forever let this place be a cry of despair and a warning to humanity," where the Nazis murdered about 1.5 million women, men, and children, mainly Jews from various countries of Europe. Auschwitz, Birkenau, 1940-1945. In the 32 months that Auschwitz operated as a designated extermination camp from March 1942 to March 1444, 1.1 million people were killed, or an average of 34,000 a month. So you can go to the next slide. So in this room are these great big sheets. It's basically a book. And every person who went and died in Auschwitz, to the best of their ability, they're constantly adding names as people come through and say, I think I had a parent. So somewhere here, I think it's down here, is Eva's family, a lot of the Moses. And so here's Dad looking through the books. But everybody has a name. Although the exact number of victims is unknown, many Jews, Poles, and Gypsies died here. So next slide. And then the next slide. So Miriam and Eva went to Israel, and Eva ended up being the highest woman soldier that you can be in the Israeli Army Engineering Corps. And so when she was sharing that with the Israel Army, people were bowing down to her. They were like, oh my gosh, you were a woman and had that job. So obviously she was very smart, determined, got an education, and climbed through the ranks of the Israeli Army. So next page, next slide. This is her husband, Mickey, her son, Alex, and daughter, Raina. Next slide. So she met Mickey in Israel, but he was actually already in America. He was kind of looking for a wife and visiting some family members that he was actually able to find after the Holocaust was over. So Mickey is a survivor, but does not believe in forgiveness. So you can imagine this household at any given day. Here's the woman who's going through the process of trying to forgive. She's got little children. She's trying to learn English. Life's crazy. He volunteers at the museum, but does not support her actual mission of forgiveness and educating others about forgiveness. His whole thing is teaching people about the Holocaust. Mickey was actually rescued by an American soldier named Neff. He was given a Coca-Cola, dressed as an American soldier, and was smuggled out. So it's pretty cool. He was sent to, they were able to get him to Terre Haute, and he lived with the Neff family and started his new life with the Neff family. He went to Purdue. He received a pharmacy degree in 1942. 1959, he goes over to Israel, meets Eva, and because Eva did not know English, she was very quiet. And so he thought, yeah, I'm going to marry this nice, quiet woman. And when she started learning English, realized that she was not this quiet woman, that he had married this woman that was basically this outgoing, crazy, had very, very angry with the world and how life had turned out. So it's interesting to hear Alex talk about his mom and dad. And we were able to listen to Alex one day when we were going to, I think, Auschwitz I, and he was telling his story. In 1995, I believe at one of the liberation celebrations, the twins, the surviving twins, and their designated child passed the torch, and so that became his stance, following his mother and supporting his mother's mission on forgiveness and telling her story. So if you get the Purdue Alumni Magazine, you've probably seen Mickey Core maybe this past fall. He had a birthday and he had some surgery, and they had done a special article about him. He does not miss a football game or a basketball game. And Alex says that 90 minutes is the only time, except for during the game, that he does not think about his time in a concentration camp. He was not at Auschwitz, he was at a different one. And then the next slide is Alex and Eva. Her son, Alex, is her biggest supporter. He retells his mother's story. Alex is committed to keeping his mother's mission and work alive. At the 50th anniversary in Auschwitz, he received the torch of that and committed to tell her story. His sister Rena is no longer supportive of her mother's mission work and doesn't come to Terre Haute very often, may call mom once or twice a year, but she can't handle it. It goes against everything that they believe with their Judaism, that it's up to God to forgive, and so she's pretty much backed off. So the next slide is a picture of Eva in 1965. And I follow her on Twitter, and she tweets something every day. This is probably one of the pictures that came through my tweet maybe a month afterwards. And this is a picture before I forgave the Nazis. I was very angry and pain. I can't even recognize myself. So, and then she talked about, she's so glad she could forgive and that her life is going on. In 1965, she also became a United States citizen. She believed she's still a realtor in Terre Haute. Up until 1980, she spent most of her life angry and bitter. Small things would set her off and she would go crazy, chasing people all over the neighborhood. And on our trip, we had a judge who was one of Alex's friends. He and his son were on the trip. And then another one of Alex's friends who'd never been on the trip would talk about Halloween and just how crazy Eva would get. Because in Terre Haute, when they were growing up, they would put swastikas on the windows. They would spray paint their house and call them dirty Jews and stuff. That didn't bother Eva and Mickey as much as the corn. Apparently, and you guys might know, you throw corn on people's porches, and I don't know what that all means, and Alex didn't quite understand, and I don't know if we ever figured that out, but there was something about the corn hitting the front porch, and I'm assuming it had something to do with the firing of the bullets, you know, killing people in the concentration camp, but that would set her off, and she would run after kids, and she'd get in the car and chase them down. And so that throwing the corn on her porch would trigger all those memories from Auschwitz. So she became the crazy lady in their neighborhood. And the judge and Michael were just like, man, this is not the same Eva Core that we grew up with. They also recalled the time when when Eva came to tell her story, like in the 8th grade, and it went sour. And she started yelling at everybody that they were all Jew haters, and it got really ugly. But then as she's grown in her speaking, obviously, and working through forgiveness, that has all changed. So next slide. In 1978, the release of the Holocaust, this motion picture came out on TV. I guess it was a mini-series. This was the start of her path to forgiveness. Adapting to life in the United States was challenging, but she had 2 children and became a real estate agent. She remembers the neighbors would call her the crazy survivor. She said, I was a survivor, but I wasn't crazy. It went on that way until the NBC miniseries Holocaust aired. When Eva called the local affiliate in Terre Haute to make sure that they would be airing the miniseries, the TV station learned that she was a Holocaust survivor and invited her on the air for interviews at the beginning and the end of the series. So as she began to tell her story, things started to come together for her. And she was able, all this stuff that she'd never shared with anybody, not even her own children, just her husband, they would talk, started to come to surface. And then for the children, it started to make sense. Well, yeah, I'd be angry and crazy if I grew up like this, and if I was held hostage and people experimented on me and injected me with things, and if I lived from hour to hour every day, not knowing if I was going to survive, I would be angry and upset. So I believe in 1959, if you want to go to the next slide, Viktor Frankl, his famous quote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And this is a saying that Eva really grasped. After the interviews, the local junior high invited her to come and talk about her experience at Auschwitz. Eva says, I began lecturing and I have never stopped. She said she figures she's given over 6,000 lectures since then. Eva admits for 5 decades of her life she was bitter. If I would have discovered forgiveness sooner, I would have not had those, I would have had that 50 years of my life. Forgiveness. And then she says, forgive, see the miracle that can happen. In 1984, she made the first trip to Germany, and she was on a German airplane, and she was starting to hyperventilate, and she was starting to go back to when she was 10 years old, because everybody was talking in German. And I'm sure she was probably having a post-traumatic stress scenario right there with her. But for the 8 hours on the airplane, she knew she just had to get back to Auschwitz, so she did. And in 1985, Eva and Miriam united 122 twins 40 years after their liberation to seek information about the experiments and bring Dr. Mengele to justice. The 40th anniversary is when they all got together. Eva says, echoes in Auschwitz were part of my life, but I did not speak publicly about my experiences until 1979 after the TV series. People would ask me about the experiments, but I couldn't remember very much. Find other twins who were liberated with me. I wrote to newspapers asking them to publish an appeal for other survivors of the Mengele to contact me. By 1980, I was sending out 500 letters a year, but no one would respond. In desperation, one day I decided to start an organization in which I myself would make myself president. People are always impressed if they get a letter from a president, and it worked. Finally, I was able to find other twin survivors and exchange memories and medical records. It was an immensely healing experience. So next slide. 1991, Eva and Miriam returned to Auschwitz to recreate their 1945 liberation photo for the German-filled Children of Fire. And that's also a book as well. As you can see, Eva's signature color is blue. She wears a lot of blue. I don't think we ever saw her not wearing blue the whole 10 days. And at that point, she had already been gone 3 weeks. So she's got a lot of blue in her collection. So next. In late 1992 is when Miriam was diagnosed with kidney cancer. Eva donated one of her kidneys. In 1993, in July, 1 month after Miriam's death, a Boston College professor invited Eva to a conference on Nazi medicine. The professor asked Eva to bring a Nazi doctor with her. Eva's reply, "Where am I going to find a Nazi doctor? Last time I looked, they were not advertising in the yellow pages." So as you can see, Eva's sense of humor has been is very important to her to help her deal with her tragic past. In 1993, she was invited to the lecture. She thought it was a mad request until she remembered that I'd once been in a documentary which also featured a Dr. Hans Munch from Auschwitz. I contacted him in Germany, and he said he would meet with me for a videotaped interview to take to the conference. In July 1993, I was on my way to meet this Nazi doctor. I was so scared, but when I arrived at my home, he treated me with the utmost respect. I asked him if he'd seen the gas chambers. He said this was a nightmare he dealt with every day of his life. I was surprised that Nazis had nightmares too, and asked him if he would come with me to Auschwitz to sign a document at the ruins of the gas chambers. He said that he would love to do it. Next slide. So these are, this one is his actual document. This one is actually his documentation about how he witnessed the Jews being killed, the Gypsies. They actually met in Auschwitz in 1995, where he signed the documents at the gas chambers. Also, Eva at that point declared her own amnesty to the Nazis. She asked him to go to Auschwitz, and they signed their declarations together. She wondered how in the world she would ever be able to thank him. She would go to Hallmark stores, different card stores. She would look for a thank you note, but she's always like, how do you thank a Nazi doctor for, acknowledging this all happened, so that the rest of the world, for the time to come, even the unborn children will know that the Holocaust was real. So she discovered one night, she just woke up going, I'm gonna write him a thank you note. I could forgive the Nazis for what they did, but I needed to tell him I needed to forgive him. It's one thing to say to a group of people, I forgive you, but now, face to face, she needed to write that and tell him she forgave him. It took 4 months to write the letter. I felt such freedom, she said. I was no longer a tragic prisoner. I was free from Auschwitz and free in Mengele. Forgiveness is the seed of peace. I'm not going to read the amnesty because we're running out of time. So when she had somebody proofread her letter to Dr. Hans, and her friend looked at her and said, you've forgiven this doctor, but I think it's time that you forgave Dr. Mengele too. At first, I was adamant that I could not forgive Dr. Mengele, but then I realized I had the power now. The power to forgive. It was my right to use it. Nobody could take it away. We talked about that. The day I forgave the Nazis privately, I forgave my parents, whom I hated all my life, for not having saved me from Auschwitz. Children expect their parents to protect them. Mine couldn't. and then I forgave myself for hating my parents. Forgiveness is really nothing more than an act of self-healing and empowerment. I call it a miracle medicine. It is free. It has no side effects. I believe with every fiber of my being that every human being has the right to live without the pain of the past. For most people, there is a big obstacle to forgiveness because society expects revenge. It seems we need to honor our victims, but I always wonder if my dead loved ones would want me to live with pain and anger until the end of my life. Some survivors do not want to let go of the pain. They call me a traitor and accuse me of talking in their name. I have never done this. Forgiveness is as personal as chemotherapy. I do it for myself. So next slide. So this is Candle's Museum, and Candle stands for Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiment Survivors. So she founded this in 1994 in Terre Haute. Next slide. Okay, so Eva's definition of forgiveness is a way of healing oneself from the pain, trauma, or tragedy. In addition, forgiveness is available to anyone without cost, a benefit to the hurt person, and not necessarily the perpetrator. Proactive rather than passive. It is more than letting go. A personal choice, it can be done only in one person's name. And I've got some videos of her and books over here that she has written. My name's on them, but if anybody wants to take something and give it to my mom and dad later on, feel free to. She's got, I mean, I'm just doing this in 45 minutes. But one of the things that the twins in one of the movies, she's talking for all of us. And Eva has never said, I'm talking for all the twins. It's only for me. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not condoning the evil deed. It is not aligned with any one religion. Forgiveness is not a way to counteract violence. We must defend ourselves when necessary. Next slide. The mission of Candles shine a light on the story of the Holocaust and Eva Core to empower a community of critical thinkers who will illuminate the world with hope, healing, respect, and responsibility. More than 10,000 people visit the museum every year, and many thousands seek out the message through Candle's website, books, and videos. And in correlation with that, Eva, next slide, goes back to Auschwitz and gives a first-hand, step-by-step account of what took place there. And then in 2003, there was a bombing and the terrorists, but it was just an anti-Semitism act of violence. And so she wanted to rebuild the museum. In this corner, some of the Terre Haute children brought in pennies, and they wanted to collect pennies and represent every person who had died at Auschwitz. And that's the remaining pennies that were left after the fire. Next slide. This is what the museum looks like today. They've collected things. They've gotten reprints. They have like 3 warehouses full of documents, articles from World War II that people send to her. They can't, obviously, in this little space, show all of that. They're hoping to make the museum in Terre Haute the Eva Core Center, but bring a Holocaust museum. They're in the middle of fundraising money for a Holocaust museum in Indianapolis. And so when that is all funded, they will bring all that stuff out of the warehouses and just make it a great big display. And then the next slide is the participants of Trip B. My dad and I were on Trip B. And there were 70 of us. There were actually 4 father-daughter pairs, 6 mother-daughter pairs, 19 participants from Montana. The oldest person was 80. The youngest person was 14. And these participants were from all over the globe. We had people from Germany, Austria, Canada, and all walks of life. Students, educators, retired people. And then the last, one of the last slides is The 3D dimensions. So there are 20 Holocaust survivors who have gone to USC in California, and the students there have made 3 dimensions. And so the Holocaust survivors answer about 2,000 questions at their week at USC. Anything that they think that somebody will later on ask them, they have an answer for, and it is really creepy. Alan's little boy, Trey, actually interacted with Pincher, who's a Holocaust survivor who does not believe in forgiveness. And we asked questions. He told his story, and I mean, it was like he was right there in front of us. It was amazing. So anyways, these are actually floating around the country. The school teachers can actually get the screen and then project the Holocaust survivor on there, and the kids can actually interact. Pretty phenomenal thing. And then Eva Kor, there's going to be a documentary, next slide, on her. And Jay's going to show the little bit of, I think it's like maybe a minute long. This is going to be released in January 2018, and it's actually her whole story.
Very good sound.
No sound?
Okay. To the lowest form of human existence.
So people, when we were there the first couple of days, they were taping us, they were taping Eva to do small snippets of her, to put in her documentary. So it gives her life. So anyways, we can forget that.
The survivor who forgave.
We'll try to put it out there. Maybe Mom and Dad can tell you when it's actually out there. It'll definitely probably be on a YouTube channel, and it may be on PBS. We're not quite sure. But all of Terre Haute will have access to it. It is how you can follow Eva, information on the museum. Awards, she's got lots of awards. So the museum, if you ever get to Terre Haute, take an hour, go to the museum. You can follow her on Twitter. And then the next slide. These were our other sites while we were in Krakow. The Plaszow Concentration Memorial. This is, I don't remember how many feet high it is, but there's a crack. So these are, it's a memorial to Holocaust survivors, and it's them standing at attention. And then there's a crack that basically goes through their heart to represent their broken hearts.
5 feet high.
Is it 75 feet high?
Something like that.
And then it shows how some people have their hands down to their sides, some are clenched. The next slide is, I think this, the empty chair memorial. This is in the Jewish ghetto. Since 68,000 Jews deported from Krakow. And then the next slide is Schindler's Factory Museum. We spent an afternoon in there, and it is basically set up as you were walking in the 30s and 40s through World War II. So you hear fire bombings, you hear gunfire, you hear people being taken away. Next slide. The salt mines. This is pretty phenomenal. Everything in the mine was carved out by the miners. Some miners never came out. They spent their whole life creating images and carving. This is a chandelier made out of the salt. And the big, if you go to the next slide, this is part of the big chapel there. And all the way around is the life in Christ carved out. So it's Jesus' life carved out in small segments. So it's pretty amazing.
And everything is salt.
Yeah, it's all salt. It's truly a salt mine. So if you go up to the wall, lick it, you're going to taste salt. So next slide. Here's some of the miners. They've done their own figurines. Next slide. So we went to the mountain on the last day at Zapopan, and so you can see this at the top of the mountain. It's very much a resort town. They do lots of skiing, snowshoeing, any winter sports, and then in the summer, millions of people come up to the mountaintop. Next slide. It's about 2 hours from Krakow where we were. So it's just kind of like a big blueberry festival, all day long, all week long during the summer. Next slide. All the houses are log house. And then, of course, in Poland, the Catholic Church is very much an influence. And every time we saw a Catholic church, just like we did with our German friends, the 2 times we were there, we would stop and go to the Catholic Church and go in and look and take pictures and different things because they're just beautiful. They're just beautiful churches. So next slide. And then next slide. So questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
As she got a little older, you say she had this problem that her parents allowed this to happen. She realized her parents didn't have any choice, didn't she? Because they were taken away.
Correct.
And then,
But when you're 10, you still expect
yeah.
your parents. And she harbored all of that in
yeah.
it took her a lifetime. And, it was her raising her children and protecting them from the Halloween costumes and kids and the pranks. And, when we were there at the cattle car, she read letters of forgiveness to her mom and dad. And her dad was pretty abusive anyways. He was very stern, didn't beat them, but was just wasn't a nice man, where she always said mom was the angel, mom was the angel, mom was the protector. And so she had to work through that. And I don't know, as a young kid, it took a long time. Yes?
It's not a question, but I think it needs to be said that the Nazis themselves were victims because they didn't have a choice. If you didn't do what they told you to do, they killed your family.
Yep. Next question.
Was there ever any documentation left after all those tests and everything that they did?
They kept medical records. So in the late I think it was 89, they were able to get the records because that's when Miriam was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And so they figured, her doctors were like, it had to have been something you were injected with because your kidneys have never grown. They've never been more than the size of a 10-year-old.
So never finding out anything good from them?
Yes, she sued several pharmaceutical companies, but to know exactly, they probably do know, I just don't know that question. It's probably in one of the books. Yeah.
A lot of times when you go into a place that's been like myself, I went into one outside of Munich.
Mm-hmm.
Krakow. And there's that horror to make a hair stand. Did that happen to you?
I felt very peaceful. We all felt very peaceful. We kept saying on the way to the bus, we were on the blue bus. And I was with some educators. I was actually chosen as a fellow. The Candles Museum gave me some money to go towards my trip. I had told my story of having 3 family members murdered and stuff. So they wanted to make sure I got on the trip. So they gave me some money. So myself and a couple of the educators and other fellows, we were talking about like, oh my gosh, are we going to cry the whole time? Are we going to be okay? And believe it or not, it was a very peaceful place. Obviously, when you go into some of the buildings and, you see all the shoes and the hair, the fillings, their watches, things that were left, and that millions of people have died here. It didn't feel like that at all. I mean, the forest was probably the worst place for me, where I wanted to just sob, but it was like, but it's so peaceful. And I have to think that since these people were taken of their own free will, that they're in a better place.
Now, these 2 camps, were they within walking distance?
Yes. You can walk, but we took a bus between because Eva is actually, because she's 83, she doesn't walk very well. She had golf carts. And so you can access it by walking, but yeah, they're several miles apart. And you could see people walking from one place to the other, but we just got on the bus because we had special parking because we were with Eva.
Maybe Auschwitz 1 and 2.
Pardon?
You made mention.
Oh,
of
yes, Auschwitz
one.
1 is where the brick buildings are. The camp itself is Birkenau, Auschwitz 2.
Birkenau.
And they're side by side.
Yeah, they are side by side.
And Frank was in Bergen-Belsen.
Yes.
The railroad track divided.
Did you mention once when she was about 10 years old, they could have migrated someplace else with the,
To Palestine with an uncle. But the father was,
was there any animosity between her and her dad for not doing that?
yes, and that
So
was
maybe
part of
that's
the
the reason.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. She had to forgive him for not getting them out of there. So this forgiveness piece has been very interesting for me. So 2.5 years ago, I started on my master's degree, and I'm getting a master's in school counseling. And I've just been doing this the first year just because Culver's making me do it. You know, if I ever want to get to be the director of college advising, which I don't want to be, my boss would just hassle me. You got to get a master's. I'm not getting a master's, Kevin. I don't need a master's to do school, to do college counseling. I have everything I need. And so he finally conned me into it. And the first year I was like, I'm just doing this because I have to do it. My school's making me. And then, I've really started to work through some different issues, working with veterans, the students that I'm working with. And I see the underlying theme in most kids and adults that I come across, and it's forgiveness at some point. And so this summer, I had to take a research class, and my professor challenged me to do it on forgiveness. And I looked at Dr. Griffith, I said, are you kidding? What do I have to share? I'm still upset with the Supreme Court that they're allowing Wayne Cooch to have another trial. I haven't worked through my own forgiveness. And he's like, no, I don't want you to tell your story. I want you to find people who have forgiven, who have had major tragedies and have worked through forgiveness. So I wrote this paper, researched it, and right before I'm leaving to go to Poland, Dr. Griffith called and said, in the fall, when we start again, you and I, we're going to sit down and we're going to get your paper published. And I'm like, are you kidding? This paper is not worth publishing. And so we've been working on it this fall. And it's my story. It's Pinter, who's one of the 3D people, Eva, and myself. So it's very, very interesting. So I have to do 1,000 hours at an elementary school for the school counseling piece. So I've been doing it at Argus Elementary. So the professor that I'm working under, another one, Dr. Regala, is like, so to go along with your research, let's start working with students who have anger issues. Let's see forgiveness. So the last 6 weeks or so, I've been at Argus Elementary, and I've got a preschooler, I've got a kindergarten, I've got 7 kids that I am counseling. And one of the things that I do with them every other week is working on the forgiveness. And so they sit in front of me and they just let it all out. And then I say, okay, then it may be an incarcerated parent. It could be a parent who's died. Okay, well, what do you think your mom or dad, whoever that person is that they're angry towards, what do you think they would say? That they love me and that they're sorry that they left me, blah, blah, blah. So this whole forgiveness piece has been very exciting to watch with these elementary kids. So I have no idea what is going to happen with this, but it's been very therapeutic for me to work through forgiveness, to watch and spend, 8 days with Holocaust survivors. So I will keep you posted on all of that, but I just wanted to share that this is probably going to be my platform until I die, is helping people work through forgiveness. So anyway, thank you. If you don't have any more questions.
Thank you.